I'm Josh Fiala. I'm an architect and urban designer with a design and planning firm called the Cecil Group out of Boston. And we're working with the town of Clinton through a Vibrant Communities Initiative grant, which is run through the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation. And we're looking at the Unilever property and the area around the Unilever property, and hopefully coming up with the town some very realistic revitalization strategies that can help reposition that property so it's really a contributing factor in the town and the broader planning that's going on in the context of the town. So this is a more focused effort on one particular place. I have my boss with me, Steve Cecil, who's the owner of the Cecil Group, and then we also have some other team members. Todd Bryant of Historic Resources is here also. So Todd will be saying a little bit more in that section. And we have two other team members who are not with us today. We have FXM and Associates, who are our marketing economists, who are helping us think about the financial feasibility and options as we move forward. And we have Ty and Bon on our team, who is a civil and environmental engineer who have been looking at the environmental aspects of the site. So what we're trying to get at today, and what we've already had a great success in talking to some of you individually in another room, we want to get your feedback on the Unilever property, and ultimately we want to craft with you all some ideas about what the community would like to see grow and occur in this part of it. We'll explain to you a little bit of the scope and purpose of our study so that you can understand that hopefully we're here to kind of advance things in a targeted way, but we have a very sort of defined charge. We have a schedule which is about 6 months, and then we're going to go through a series of diagrams, which we showed you, two of which in another room. Hopefully the rest of it you'll find pretty interesting as well. So it just helps us understand the context in which the site sits and what we're looking at in terms of the characteristics there. And then what we want to do is, I think probably we'll break into two halves, a half for Steve and a half for me in the front and back of the room. And then we just want to walk you all through some questions and get as many of your comments as we can down on a marker pad so we can take that information back with us about what you think could happen here, should happen here, what we want to help see grow here, and then what absolutely should not happen also. So this is our study area. A lot of you saw it in the room next door. We're right next to the train station. You can't get closer to the train station than the Unilever property, as you can see in that photograph. But we also include a lot of the residential neighborhood, which is up North High Street and High Street. Basically, the chunk of land between I-95 and Route 1 is what we're looking at. Our schedule, this is probably barely legible. This is the eye test for the back of the list. But we're here in January. We've had a few months, a couple months to get familiar with the site, familiar with the characteristics that are there, get some information downloaded to ourselves and the project team. And we're at the Community Visioning Public Workshop today. We've got a few months following on after this. We have a series of monthly steering committee meetings. The steering committee is composed of kind of a select cross-section of commission and department members across the town and some residents within the study area. And then ultimately, next after this, we'll be taking all this information together and thinking about some revitalization strategies and alternatives, testing those in terms of their feasibility across a couple different aspects like financial and the physical fit of them. And then ultimately coming back with some recommendations about what the type of actions the town could take to help unlock the property and some private actions that could occur as well. So we do have, somewhere we have some little project descriptions. So if you want to grab some of those, maybe on your way out, but yeah, it basically lays out a process. We have some meeting dates established for the steering committee looking forward, so you're welcome to sit in on those for public meetings. Our goals basically, the first one we're hopefully going to get a very good handle on today, establishing a shared community vision for the study area. That outcome of the process really is that revitalization plan and action strategy for the property, which has several components. Transit-oriented development. Does transit-oriented development, does that sound familiar to you guys? Is that something you're familiar with? So in planning circles, really, that's meaning properties which are located directly adjacent to these rail stations, to transit amenities like that. They have certain characteristics which make them special, which make them attractive to developers, make them attractive to tenants and users. And really it's about creating walkable places which have other opportunities to get around besides driving. So that's what Transit Oriented is about. This property has really unusual opportunities in that regard. And then as Todd mentioned briefly too, one of the outcomes will be also potentially a historic district or village district in the study area. And that has several benefits, both in the tax credits that are available to properties, but also in the ability to create design standards. So that'll be something that is kind of on the town side that can be established that can help advance things. So some characteristics and features of the study area. We're looking at about 162 acre area, quite large. Quite a few number of parcels, even more buildings than parcels. There are multiple houses on some of the parcels. And then a little bit less owners, like for instance, the Unilever property has several properties parcels which they own within the study area. And that's what we're looking at. So, historic context, a lot of the historic properties and homes which we see in the study area are depicted in this, I guess, etching or engraving painting from
Burns Eye map, it's a print.
That's right.
The graph, yeah.
So this is our study area transposed on this historic map, and you can see we're there. A lot of the features and characteristics of that study area were established back from, you don't have to know, I think it was 1908 or something like that.
What,
the date on it? Yeah.
I don't remember, it's 19th century.
Yeah. And the inlet, and it's really just a fantastic vision for the community, and I guess if there's a vision for the broader town of Clinton that you're headed towards, this would be, this is pretty ideal, just the look that you've got going here in the historic image. So that's kind of food for thought and where we were headed from. And that predates you don't see a large factory in this also, just to mention.
Or a highway.
So the regional context of the property, we've got the commuter rail station, the rail station right at the center of the map there, prominent feature in terms of the transportation network. I-95, very easy access from I-95 on and off. The site is nestled between the two of them. We've got Route 1, coastal Route 1. We've got 145 there and 81. So in terms of access, state routes, interstate highways, rail transit, it's one of the best locations you can think of. And the sites basically fit within all of that network. So the node at Clinton Crossing, very high traffic, for instance, regionally. Then the rail station is another important node. The Main Street District, very important node in terms of the walkability and sense of place for the town of Clinton. And then the beaches. You've got all those major amenities and attractions all within a stone's throw of the study area. And Clinton Crossing, if you need your outlet. Thanks. So within a more focused local look at the transportation network, there's some interesting things to note. In sort of the technical planning circles, we use walking radii from train stations as a indicator of what's convenient to use in terms of train station. People are likely to walk to a train station within that half-mile radius, which roughly equates to about a 10 or 15-minute walk. Once you're beyond that, people don't find it convenient to get to that train station on foot. So you can see our study area largely falls within that catchment area for a train station, which makes it prime real estate for a walkable community. Within a quarter-mile radius, it's like you can roll out of bed and basically be at the train station. It's very convenient. So that is really good. And that's these houses here and the Unilever property, the factory itself, that's a prime transit adjacent site. And then the access, some local street complications like John Street and the one-way nature of it, and we've heard already about some of the delivery vehicles having some difficulty negotiating back in that area when Unilever was in operation. But overall, a tremendously accessible local site with the road network. Station improvements are planned by Combat. We'll get into that in a little more detail. detail in a few slides, but they are coming. We haven't found a specific date, but they are coming, and we know that much. And then there's also some downtown revitalization which is occurring, some planning in the works about streetscape improvements in downtown, Main Street walkability improvements and landscape improvements. The land use and urban design, this is one of the maps we had up in the other room. Mostly residential neighborhood for the most part, as you can see with building structures as well, and then industrial uses, and then some vacant wooded lands as well. You can see from this view the existing buildings that the Unilever factory and property really is out of place in a way in the residential fabric of the neighborhood. And it's very similarly scaled all around it. And then this is the original Art Deco facade here. And then there's been an additive process as the success of the plant has grown and grown. The building has grown to accommodate those manufacturing processes. And you see that, you can almost see in the way that these lines are broken down. The original building, in addition, in addition, in addition. So as we think about the potential reuse of the property, as that was an additive evolution over time, it could also be a subtractive evolution as we think about fits and uses in the future. The existing parking, primarily it's driveway parking for the residential uses. Unilever has at its center some surface parking areas, paved parking areas. There's a few parking areas by the pool supplier on the corner there, and then the residential, not residential, the commuter parking associated with the train station and those service lots there. But primarily a very wooded, green feeling study area. Other natural features, the biggest sort of concern in terms of natural features of the study area is a freshwater pond nearly at its center, and that would have a buffer around it, which would restrict development. So what we're looking at, for the most part, is that the northern portion of the study area with that wetland and the buffer would likely not change in the future just because of those natural features. So when we're thinking about sort of different uses and changes in the future, we're thinking about that area south of the freshwater pond for the most part.
How many acres is the plant, you know?
I don't have a size enough hand. If we can, that's something we can snap off pretty easy, maybe in the next meeting. And then the other main feature, which is outside of our study area, but there are all the Indian River estuary wetlands associated with that in the inlet area. With being a coastal community, we are in the coastal management zone, offset off the coast. And that includes an undesignated tidal wetland in the study area. Our study area is this here, basically North High Street and High Street. But that occurs north of the freshwater pond also, so that whole area north is constrained by the natural features of the site. Here's also the coastal boundary. And you can see again our site within that area. It does fall within the coastal management zone. So there'll be other coastal considerations as well as development is considered in the future. We'll be looking at that. Ownership patterns, this is something we just like to look at to see who is actually living in the home and how the addresses match up in the assessor's data. So it's not, there's not too many hard conclusions to be drawn from this type of analysis, but it just gives you a feel. This is not too skewed one direction or another in terms of owner occupation. And things like the Unilever properties show up as owner occupied, but it's not an active occupants, as you know. So take what you may from this thing. Historic properties, maybe Todd, you can say a word if you want about this as well, but basically there's a historic resource inventory completed and these properties are reflected on the map here.
Right. Hi, I'm Todd Bryant. I'm from Heritage Resources, and I was one of the two people who did the historic resource inventory that included, and which we completed just in, I think we did the presentation in March here. So it's quite fresh. And we did 150 properties in the town of Clinton, and part of that, we were on both sides of this and all the way also down North Main Street and into Liberty Street, and also a little bit on East Main Road. But In this area, we looked at every single building on every one of these streets. And what we came up with then, and we did a little bit of research on each and every one of them, and what we came up with was that this area is prime for a National Register Historic District. These are extremely significant and important houses all the way down here. It's a very fragile area because there's so much traffic. So it becomes exceptionally important for all of these houses on these streets to be included in a National Register District, and as well as the Unilever factory. And the big advantage here for the Unilever factory and for its future uses is that once it becomes designated as a contributing property in a national district, it becomes eligible for state and federal historic rehabilitation tax credits. So for a future developer, this is a huge advantage. The state credit is 25% of the hard costs, and the federal credit is 20% of the hard and soft costs, and they can be combined. So you're looking at a massive financial incentive to redevelop this property and retain the 1929 Art Deco facade. There's been a Pond's factory on this site since the 1880s, but in 1929 they built the building with that was their first concrete building, and eventually they tore down all the wooden buildings and placed them the way they are. But this is it's very important, I think, to the identity of the neighborhood and also to the ability of a future developer to look at this place as something important rather than just another tear down. So that's where we're going with that.
I have a question. You talk about the building, but Unilever still owns it. Are they readily going to give it up?
Well, they can sell it.
Right, exactly.
Well, I mean, no, but there are no restrictions to a National Register designation.
Yeah, are they willing to sell it?
Who knows?
It's for sale now.
That's part of the process. We're trying to figure out if they're in fact willing to sell it. But, and even if they kept it and redeveloped it using this, nobody much cares who the owner is as long as they do the right thing.
Through this process, we are trying to open lines of communication with Unilever themselves. We have not had success with that yet to date. There are actions that the town can take which are meaningful, which will be studied through this process. There are also actions that the private owners and entities can take as well. Ideally, we'll get those lines of communication open through this process and then be able to start to make, have everyone moving in a similar mutually beneficial direction. If that's not the case, we still think that there's quite a bit of good work that can be accomplished through this process. So we're hopeful that we do hear from them.
Two questions. One is, can the present owners decline the historic district designation?
It takes a number of them, right?
Right, it would take 51% of the property owners to actively protest historic district designation, and they would have to submit notarized letters to the State Historic Preservation Office. But they would need to be 51% opposed. No response is considered a positive.
Hey Todd, maybe you could also explain what national and state historic designation means and what it doesn't mean, because people have some misconceptions about how it constricts them.
Okay, well, that's a good point. There are no restrictions to a national or state registered district designation. None. You can do, I mean, we lose properties in national registered districts every day.
You can tear it down, you can repaint it, you can do whatever you want.
Matter.
It doesn't affect your personal property rights.
It can be magenta, we don't care. Neither does Washington. There are no restrictions, regardless of what you may have heard, there are no restrictions to a national registered designation or a state registered designation.
Well, because the reason that you get it is that if you do redevelop it, particularly with commercial uses, with commercial properties, you get a huge tax benefit potentially to do it. So that's where the incentive is. The idea is that a private owner of that Art Deco building could tear it down, but once it's torn down, they can never have anything like those benefits again. And that's the carrot. So it's not a stick, it's a carrot that's available. And certainly there are a number of different programs that have been available to help save or improve historic properties. But as I say, they're more in the carrot side of things than they are the stick. And that's why the programs have worked so very well, and why most property owners, when they learn about it, say, this is a good thing for me. I can't lose, but I could really win.
Absolutely, and also it gets the story of this area into the permanent national record. So, and many of you who live in that area are very proud of your houses, you're very proud of their history, and this is a way to get that, you know, that history and that story into the permanent national record. And it gives a certain cachet to the whole area. It gives a certain leverage that you might be able to use. I mean, also, and this is especially important for those people living along High Street. There's something called Section 106 in the federal law, and that means that whenever there's a federal project, or in Section 106 and Section 4F, whenever there's a federal project or a federal highway project that's taking place, they have to pay special attention to the effect on the properties in a historic district. So if somebody if they wanted to ride on this road, or if they wanted to do something over here, or there was some kind of federal project or state project using federal money that was going to affect your house, you would have a voice. You would have a powerful voice, a voice that you don't now have. So that's one of the other real advantages.
Todd, if an owner takes advantage of the tax credits under either the national or state registry district, there must be some constraints on that. I mean, you can't accept.
So you have to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. But basically, that's just stuff you do anyway.
But then what about the demolition possibility in the future?
You can, there is no if you want to tear it down, you can, much to my dismay, if you want to tear it down, you can. If you want to sell it to anybody, you can. And the homeowner credits will not apply to this National Register District until July 1st of 2015. But on July 1st, 2015, homeowners in a National Register District here in Clinton will be able to access the state historic homeowner rehabilitation credits.
But I think this is important to see that if you have an historic building like the Art Deco building, which you couldn't get tax credits for, is to coat it with reflective glass so you can't see that wonderful masonry exterior.
Right.
That doesn't count.
Yeah, and
that's
you couldn't,
what the credit is to do, is to say we have these historic buildings. We want to make sure that the historic character and architecture is preserved. The benefit to the project and the uses inside is enormous, but we want to make sure that we keep the look and feel that has been so important in the past.
exactly right.
Maybe just to clarify, the distinction that's going on here is that the district has no encumbrances, but once the credits are applied, that's when there's, because you're receiving something for
Right.
the benefit.
And even then, it's 5 years.
Do you guys have any data? Has anyone done any studies on the effect of historic districts on property values in Connecticut?
Yes, there was a very good study that was done just a couple of years ago by Donovan Ripkema, who was kind of the high priest of preservation economics. He sort of invented the field. He's a really great guy. Most of the data is on, and that study is available online, and if you're interested, contact us and I'll get it to you. Most of the data nationwide and in Connecticut has been done on local historic districts because it's easier to track those properties. And but in Connecticut, we also, I believe in this study, that he also extended it to national districts without quite as much data, but it's still there. In local historic districts, which this certainly could be, property values always outpace the surrounding areas, every time. The values are higher, and they retain that value and they increase faster. National Register districts, not quite so much. It still tracks it higher for the most part. All the study areas in the state, except for one, which was an especially distressed area. I can't remember which town it was.
Norwich.
Which one?
It was Norwich.
Norwich. I'm right with all this, right? Brad Schott back there from the Connecticut Trust who sponsored the study, so if I go off track.
But what is the benefit to the town? I mean, if you declare High Street a historical district, that doesn't mean there are wonderful houses on High Street and there are horrible houses on High Street. That doesn't mean that the owners are gonna make them look nice now.
Well, but it certainly gives them an incentive. It certainly gives them an incentive.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
It all
question is,
depends on the owner.
Well,
yeah, that's exactly right, but it's sort of like, we talk about, and we'll use this analogy perhaps, we talk about property. You can't compel people on private properties what they do, and that's good, I don't think we should. But you could provide opportunities. It's like growing a garden. I've never been able to force a tomato to grow in my garden. I've tried. But I can create the conditions that increase the chance considerably that we'll have a good place over time. So what the town's job is to do is it looks at its own land, the land within the town boundaries and these kinds of districts, and we'll talk about this in terms of zoning, is to set the conditions in place so that what emerges will be positive for the town as a whole.
Right. And if you're able to go to those owners and say, listen, you know, you might have thought this is just a piece of crap, but it's actually a historic house. and
then they paint it purple.
Well, then that's okay. I mean, you know, they're not going to own it forever. But you know, we can't solve that problem. We can't solve that problem. But what we can do is increase general area pride in the neighborhood by providing this level of, this is national recognition. This isn't just, you know, I'm going to write it and they're going to send it through and everybody thinks it's going to be fine. This goes through staff review at the State Historic Preservation Office. It goes through the State Historic Preservation Review Board, and believe me, they are tough. They are tough. I have come away with bruises and scars from that meeting. Not often, but it does happen, and I've seen some people really get beat up. So you got to go through them. Then it goes to the National Park Service in Washington, and they read it. And they might even come back with things that they want you to change. But once all of those people are happy, and all of those people think this is worthy of being designated a historic district, then it gets designated.
And so the reason we would want to do that is so that the Unilever property could get that too.
Well,
and
that's
that would
one
be more
reason. That's
attractive.
one reason.
That's definitely one of the reasons. If you think about the fact that, and Josh when he proceeds with the rest of the presentation, we'll talk about some of these things, but when you look at a property like that, the tendency is for manufacturing companies, or manufacturing facilities, is for them to sit. They do not have a lot of incentive. In fact, there are a lot of reasons why they don't change and improve properties. So if the town wants to see it turned back into a positive aspect of the community in terms of either employment or activity, value over time, the open space that's around it, you're likely to need to add incentives. If you can add incentives, and the great thing about the historic district and the historic contribution that it might have is that it's effectively a no cost. It doesn't cost the town anything, but you cut the cost of development in half for somebody to come in. But what we're going to talk about in the next slides a little bit in the discussions is that the key control that the town has, besides being able to help get incentives in place, is zoning. Because what zoning does, you can't make people do things with zoning, but you can keep people from doing things. Right now, that land is zoned for industrial use. Well, so if someone came back and reused it according to your zoning, they could, but the chances are pretty good that that's not what's gonna happen with that property. The amount of industrial development in New England is very low and very focused, and we have literally hundreds of millions of square feet of properties that like this, that used to be industrial. So right now, though, if someone wanted to come in and do something they're different, they can't without getting permission from the town. So one of the things you could do is to work together, and that's why we're here, to decide what kinds of things you'd like to have happen, if it's not gonna be the Fonz factory anymore, and set zoning in place. If you go and say, this is what we want, and you'd be allowed to do it, as long as it's realistic and practical. Like you're saying, if you say, and all the streets will be paved by gold, that doesn't mean anybody who's gonna come and actually do it for you. You've gotta have a reasonable approach. But you have an opportunity to open the door and to keep things from happening that you don't wanna happen. So the zoning, and in Connecticut, there's a relatively new bit of enabling legislation, which in the past, you were not able to put design standards or design controls into zoning. So you might say, well, we'd like to have retail and a brewery would be really, a brew pub would be wonderful here. But you could end up with someone who has the right parking spaces, but a really ugly outcome. Well, and when you have a historic district, it can be very important that the look and feel of what happened, and this is next to your downtown. This is part of the historic Clinton and your future. So if you play your cards right, you can say, we're opening the door to certain kinds of things, but under certain conditions. It's got to look right, it's got to feel right, it's got to be connected with the town right, and then you're ready to go.
So that's the stick.
That's in effect the stick that you have for zoning right now. Right now, people are going to have to come to you to get permission to build. And you can stop things, but remember, it's a stick. And we've worked in towns that say, we only want a certain kind of development, we're not going to let that development happen, we're not going to let that development happen. And 20 years later, the buildings are still empty. You can't make people do things with, or encourage them with a stick. So we think of it more as, what are the doors you want to open, and there are doors you want to keep closed. But the typical process is that a development team would come in and look at this and make a proposal to Unilever, and they're going to bet that they can get zoning approval from the town. And then you'll be reacting to their proposal. Maybe it's good, it might be good, maybe it's 90% good, but 10% bad. What we're trying to do is just stay ahead of that process a little bit so that you're ready and you're opening the door to the kinds of things that make sense. So the Cecil Group part of the team, while Todd's working on the historic resources and advancing that, we're going to be working on the land use and development options and what kind of zoning you can begin to set up and build partnerships, because in the end, the people who you'll be working with, Unilever and other people, you're going to want to have a relationship where you're inviting good people to town to work with, and we're trying to keep that off. So I think with that, we're
I just want to say one thing very quickly, is that, I'm in terms of what Steve has been saying there. One of the things that a lot of developers complain about is that they can't, the process takes too long. But if you have already written in your zoning regs how you want it done and what you want, the people who want to do that will come to you and they'll already know what you want, and it'll happen fast.
That's right.
I'm gonna speed us along because we're running that risk of using up way too much of all your Saturdays. So let me just finish this and then we'll break into some discussions if that's okay, unless.
And then we can answer the questions.
Then we can answer, and so maybe take a note of your questions so we can get through this. Steve covered the zoning pretty well. I just would remark that, as an example, the industrial 1 zone, which Unilever is a part of today, does not allow residential uses as right. So that's a potential use that could make a lot of sense there that would not be allowed here. A lot of people were, our maps in the other room were a little confusing on the land use map. People thought that the purple was Unilever ownership, but that was actually representing industrial uses. This map shows the properties and parcels that are owned by Unilever, just so everyone's clear about that. And it's a substantial amount of property. There are 2 concurrent studies, or well, I guess, yeah, 2 concurrent studies. One is not listed, which is a part of the process you're in today with the Plan of Conservation and Development for the town. The other is the Route 1 corridor study, which includes Clinton. You might have seen they've been doing some visioning in the communities. You might have seen them out over the last month or 2. But they're looking at how regional transportation can improve and affect the Main Street District and properties like the Unilever area. And so we're making sure that we're in contact with their consultants and that we can have some synergy between the two processes. Like I said, ComDOT has planned improvements for the Clinton Station, basically heading the Clinton Station to a dual platform with a passover similar to Guilford, and they just recently did that improvement there. Basic market conditions, I don't want to get too bogged down in this stuff, so I think I might just go a little fast. But we will hopefully post this presentation on the town website so you all can have this information as you need it. This labor force data was from 2012, which is a little bit inaccurate because Unilever was still employing some people at that time, and was one of the top 5 major employers within the town. You can see the others there, Clinton Crossing being another primary driver of employment. We've had FXM reviewing market conditions, and it's we like as a Cecil Group, we like problems like this because they're not obvious solutions, and we like to work with communities to figure out how to make it all work. But there's no projected growth for the next few years in terms of the region based upon their economic resources, and that's a challenge. So we need to be creative about how we think about repositioning the property, and be creative about what we're thinking of for solutions, and the other side of that, like Steve's talking about, the zoning and changing the fertile ground that the development can occur in. They've done a look at what's available in terms of retail. Retail is a high percentage of the jobs, mostly due to Clinton Crossing, but they've also identified some gaps, some of which are a little more local serving, which might be promising types of uses to be located more near the town center at a property such as Unilever site. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of people asked us this morning about the environmental conditions on the site. We've had Ty and Bond go through the CT Deep office and grab all the local or the publicly available files on the site and have reviewed that information. These are some pretty, I guess, probably obvious to most conclusions from all that, but it's likely that there will be site and building remediation, the extent of which is unknown. It will remain unknown, likely until the project is being redeveloped. Most of those remediation costs will be incurred by the developer. It happens all the time in brownfield redevelopments. If they cannot work that into their own financial pro formas, then there are other grants and federal and state resources to help them along in that gap. Some observations from all of that information. There are underground tanks on the site which include potentially hazardous materials. There have been reported releases and spills of industrial wastewater. The extent to which those sort of effects are still on the site are unknown. So there are signals in all of these reportings that there is contamination. There are no signals in all of this reporting that the site is glowing or that it is something that would be an unusual lift for a redevelopment. And then recent news, there was a Clean Water Act violation in 2008 with Unilever that has been recently worked out and settled, and there are funds at a local, state, and regional level being distributed in programs for remediation and different environmental projects which are currently being worked out. So the results and benefits of that are actually actively being figured out. So we just want to kick us into some discussion real quick, and we talked with the vision or the steering committee about some ideas of other places that have similar properties that may be interesting examples to learn from for our work here. We've heard a lot from the arts community already about the interest in the theater art space or art performance place, and this is really, if you think about a property like this in New England, a great community, this is the home run. This is what everyone gets really excited about. And Massamoka is a great example of a contemporary arts center in North Adams, Massachusetts. If some of you have been there, it's a great place. Great, beautiful old and mill industrial spaces that are used for art spaces today and performance spaces. But the backstory of all that is it's been a concerted effort with a lot of financial help from the state, a lot of very strong leadership from local colleges, and a lot of sort of behind the scenes moving and shaking to make all this happen, which was decades long in the making to be where it is today. So if all the stars align, this type of thing is very possible, but there are a lot of stars that have to align.
And a massive amount of money.
Another similar example to that is the Beacon site in Beacon, New York, right along the Hudson there. And this has the benefit of being a part of the Dia Art Foundation's. They had a network of these type of old industrial and art spaces, so they got plugged into that, and that was sort of the champion that was leading that redevelopment effort to transform into an art site. So it's possible, it's really an opportunity, but really it has to have a champion behind it. So if that sort of champion emerges, that could be something else that happens. The United Shoe Factory is another model, which was in Beverly, Massachusetts. Has the benefit of being on the Route 128 corridor, which is a jobs driver, a regional jobs driver. And this is an old shoe factory you can see here in its heyday as a shoe place, and then now as a business incubator up in that sort of tech sector. And what they've done is use the structure of the buildings to actually provide incubator space where, as offices grow from being a small startup to something larger, they can actually occupy more and more bays of an area that they're in. It works very well for them. And that's in a different context, but a very interesting use and something that could be very promising as a jobs and economic benefit.
Quick question, what is a business incubator? What is a business incubator?
A business incubator is, they set up basically multiple size spaces that startup companies can come in. They'll maybe even provide some common amenities, and basically it's creating a community of like-minded small startup businesses that can rely on each other to a certain extent.
Okay, great.
And leases at very low cost. It was dirt cheap when, you could get rents for $3 a foot in here when they started out. Can't do that today.
Think business condo.
Yeah.
No, it's not really.
No?
It's just you rent space, but you can rent space for really cheap. It's not, to start off with. So if you just have a little startup, a couple of people doing things, you can get some square footage, but they try to get enough businesses going, and there's interaction between the businesses. Like I say, you try to create an environment where there's some support going on, and that one happened totally organically. It wasn't like it was a big business model. It's just people started leasing this thing out at very low cost, and they were amazed at how many people just found space. But it wasn't the and by the way, some of the buildings are historic and they look pretty darn good today. But they didn't start out by fixing up the buildings. They started out by just finding ways to fill it and make sure that they could meet the building codes. So that's this idea that you can reuse sometimes low-cost space, bring businesses in, and some of them will succeed, and over time it becomes a successful place. That took very little time, to tell you the truth. That whole thing took about 10 years from start to finish. 1 million square feet, it's unbelievable. But I have to say, it's within, it's in the northern portion of the greater Boston region. It's within Route 128. It's very, very dense in a region that is generating a lot of new technology jobs. So there's some factors.
So an example a little closer to home, a little more traditional redevelopment program, really traditional mixed-use, residential, commercial, retail, a few museum components, mostly related to the history of the site itself. And this revitalization is underway. There's some progress going on, and very similar vein. Actually, not. In the next one is a similar vein in Rising Sun Mills. In Eastworks, East Hampton, this was a more small business, almost a sole entrepreneurial type of model, where a lot of effort was put into providing space, live-work type spaces, loft spaces with working component in the unit itself. And this is for attracting local artisans, entrepreneurs, small businesses. And they have had quite a bit of success reinforcing this type of local single entrepreneurial person who wants to come and live here and has been attracted to East Hampton because of it. Rising Sun Mills is another similar sort of traditional redevelopment program with residential, restaurant, commercial office tenants, corporate office tenants. and that they've got about 135 units. And what they've done with the several buildings that they have is they've taken a building program basically and put it into one section of the building complex, and then separated out the corporate offices into another area, the textile mill campus. But beyond the building also, we wanted to talk about the site itself. And there's potential with this amount of property that there will be redevelopment opportunities and strategies which can occur with new construction. And that would be, one of the things we're thinking is village scale housing. And this would be reinforcing the type of scale of housing that is already existing in the residential community there in the study area. And that it's the type of planned village communities which are occurring in a lot of places all over New England, both smaller than this site, like at the Riverwalk in Concord, and larger than this site, as in Londonderry and Windsor, the Great Pond, New Orleans community in Windsor, if any of you are familiar, it's quite sizable. But it's this type of scale that would enhance the walkability of the town center area that you see in these images. All right, so now we were a little long on that presentation, but if we can, I know that maybe we'll go. I think this portion of the program is from 12 to 1, but if people want to continue talking, we'll just stay with our notepads and
Maybe until about quarter after, so something like that. And we were planning to split into two groups in this room. We could stick with that. The other opportunity, I think that's what we really, I don't see that we have lots of good options as far as that goes and space is being used. So the one thing that we ask you to do is to try to keep our voices down, because if we get all too excited, we won't be able to hear each other. And so I think if, I'll start, and we can reorient to this corner of the room, and Josh, if you want to be in that corner of the room. And what we'd like to do is just to get your reactions and your thoughts. One of the things I want you all to try to avoid, though, is a thing we see often, which is you'll see an empty building, and say, well, I want this to happen there. Well, that's great. I got the money to do that, do you? No, you're inviting people to come in, other people who will come in. What are the things that you think have a good chance that you invite, that you'd like to invite in? And what are the things that you wouldn't want to invite in and have? So we don't get to, unfortunately, get to choose. We don't get to say, okay, we want that. We'd like to have a nice use just like that, and that's what we're going to do. Because you can't make those happen. It's more like gardening. What kind of a garden do we want to set up here? What are the kinds of uses we might invite, and what are the ones we don't? So that way, unless there's somebody in the room who's prepared right now, we're trying to get other people to bring their
Please step forward.
dollars.
My money right here.
I'm waiting for that too.
That's right. And I'm going to float between the two, so if
Okay.
anybody has questions for me, just yell them on the.
Okay, so I'm going to grab and